Hello and welcome to the Behind the Fic podcast, a podcast that interviews fanfiction writers.
So is this thing
Uh,
on?
nice. I am Fate. My full username is fatefulfaerie. And who do I have with me today?
I am Obsidian Angst. I go by Obsidian, and I am one of the other co-hosts for Behind the Fic. I have been writing for about 10 years? 10-ish years. And I actually started writing by writing Legend of Zelda fanfic when I was like 12. So it's kind of weird to still be doing it. But yeah. And we are interviewing.
So I'm DrSteggy. I go by Steggy on the internet or whatever you want to, any variation of that. I have only been writing fic really since like in the past year because I have a bunch of other weird hobbies that I couldn't do last year, and I had to do something because my job will drive me crazy if I don't. So so I spent last year writing 100,000 words of Legend of Zelda fanfic, and I'm still at it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a lot of words.
Okay,
It was a lot of words.
Today we're going to be covering one of your one-shots called Eternal Shipwreck of Our Hopes. First, we're going to have you read the portion that you decided to read for the podcast, and then we're going to discuss the one shot in full.
Okay.
Before we start, I don't remember there being any trigger warnings.
I don't believe so.
Okay. So I don't remember there being any, but unless you,
yeah,
I mean, you know your work better than anyone here.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, technically, there's character death, but
yeah,
it's not really there.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll start.
Yes.
She lost track of the days and years. Time didn't matter anyway, not anymore. It was just an endless stream in the dark and quiet of Von Naboris. The beast sat in a forgotten corner of the Gerudo Desert, a shipwreck on the sand, and her tomb. Silent, forgotten. The world had moved on while her spirit was trapped inside the ancient machine she had once had the privilege to pilot. Cold, quiet. Urbosa had a lot of time to think. How are you two getting along, anyway? His shoulders slumped ever so slightly, and he closed his eyes for a moment before resuming his stoic posture. As well as ever, his tones were neutral, but his slip had told her volumes. Link. She cocked her head and softened her voice. You can talk to me. There's no need to carry this alone. He kept his parade rest stance, a flicker of stormy emotion in his eyes there and gone. He sighed and dropped his eyes to the ground. I am pretty sure she hates me. She has made it clear that I am not welcome, and she is only tolerating me because of her father. There had been a century to look back on the calamity, to analyze in detail where they had gone wrong. She had spent almost every minute reviewing their missteps and obsessing over what they should have done instead. They had no idea what they had been up against, even if they believed they did. No idea. The beasts had been victorious 10,000 years earlier. Why wouldn't they be so again? They were destined to succeed, obviously. They had all forgotten that Ganon had learned from that loss, while they were working with scraps they didn't completely understand. He had 10,000 years to plan, while they struggled with the ancient machinery. It had seemed like they learned so much. Robbie and Purah constantly had something new to share, some insight, and there had been moments when their victory had seemed ordained. The day Revali had figured out how to work the weapons on Valmado. Having that giant fortress in the sky surely meant they were unbeatable, even if Revali had been more insufferable than usual for a week afterwards. All that work to be ended so quickly. All 5 champions' lives ended before they could even play their roles. Link had lasted the longest, but he had been the only one of them actively favored by the goddesses, and in the end, he had fallen in the mud and died too. And Zelda. Zelda. She felt a deep tug in her chest, followed by bone-deep sorrow when she thought of how they failed Zelda. She closed her eyes and sighed. Lady Urbosa, I need to talk to you. It is about the princess. He must feel comfortable with her now because he is openly agitated, tensing and releasing fingers, though his hands remain at his side. I need a way to stay in Gerudo Town. Link. He interrupts her, and she allows him. He is so quiet, typically. The outburst is slightly shocking. I need a way to stay in Gerudo Town. It's not a request. The princess is exploiting the rules that keep me outside to evade me. She has gone exploring at least twice without my knowing. I'm supposed to protect her, Urbosa, and she won't let me. His demeanor shifts, and for a moment he wears his worry like a cloak. This does not seem to be as simple as an assignment suddenly, and she cocks her head at him. All I want to do is protect her, he pleads. Please help me stay in Gerudo Town. You can do that. I can. She did. Zelda, who had never been allowed a moment to find out who she might be. Zelda, who had never even been allowed to properly grieve the loss of her mother. Zelda had barely been old enough to understand death, had been stuffed into a white ceremonial dress and pressured by her father to start trying to unlock her powers, instead of being given time and space to grieve. And she'd tried. If intent and desire were all that were needed, she would have found her magic before she hit puberty. Instead, all she had done was spend her life trying and failing, turning bitter and angry. Urbosa would never forgive King Rome for what he had done to his daughter, treating her like an object to serve, and not as the child she had been. He could excuse it for being for the good of the kingdom all he wanted. In the end, the kingdom had fallen anyway. Lady Urbosa, it pains me to write this letter to you, and I wish I were reaching out to you under better circumstances. I am grieved to report the death of the Queen. I know you were close to her. Urbosa had never cared for Rome. She liked to think that her best friend had married the Slav for Hyrulean political reasons Urbosa did not understand, but it seemed that she had genuinely liked him. Urbosa wondered how her friend would have felt about Rome pushing his 7-year-old daughter so hard to achieve her destiny that the child passed out in freezing cold water, leaving her with a fever for several days. Urbosa did not like to think about what might have happened if she hadn't found Zelda in that spring that day. The idea still made her dig non-corporeal fingers into the railings on Vanda Boris and grit her teeth, anger flaring in her. How dare he? Zelda had, finally, unlocked her powers, throwing herself in front of Link as he was dying on his feet, blocking the Guardian Stalker running them down. She had screamed in frustration, and the Guardians died, and Link collapsed, because it wasn't enough that her father, her people, and her champions had died on her watch. Her appointed knight, and whatever else he had been to her, had to as well. And now, Zelda was apparently locked in her own beast, though that seemed to be Hyrule Castle, containing the Calamity on her own. How long could she do that? What was she enduring? Had there been a blight waiting for her at the castle? Or worse?
Very good. You
Thank
can't
you.
hear my applause, but I'm applauding.
Thank you.
Very well read and very well written. I'm gonna pull up my questions here.
Okay.
My first question is, where did the decision come from to integrate pre-calamity scenes into Urbosa's reflection on her past?
It just seemed to make sense to kind of tell the story in some flashbacks. I was a very big fan of a TV show called Lost for a while before it went way off the rails, and the way that show told their stories using like flashbacks and these things they called flash forwards later, I thought it was really good and helped give you kind of some insight without having the character kind of think, like literally retelling their kind of story, word for word.
Yeah. No, I really liked how you did that, and I thought that you did it seamlessly, because there's a lot of ways that kind of writing can be a train wreck, but I think you utilized your writing style in a really way so that it flowed nicely. And I really liked that. It was, I mean, even like our last guest Bella, I told her that like it just flew by. Like it didn't seem like the amount of words it was,
Yeah.
It's a really good read. Depresso, do you have a comment or a question?
Well, I have to second the flow of the entire story was actually really nice, and even though you were jumping back between flashbacks and the present, it really didn't seem like you were jumping between flashbacks in the prison. It seemed like a natural train of thought for Urbosa.
Mm-hmm.
I do like. I personally really like the animosity that I felt from Urbosa towards Rome because I have a lot of those
Yeah.
same feelings about Zelda and
Me
Rome.
too.
But so do you think that if this were like a different story, like would you expand on those types of relationships? Or at least the
oh
dynamics
yeah.
of those relationships?
Yeah, I'm finishing up something that's basically the prequel to this story.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a name yet, but it's for a fan. Yeah, that's the worst part, is coming up with the stupid titles.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Too hard.
I'm hoping that'll be out at the end of the month or so. It was written for a Big Bang, and that's wrapping up. So
Mhm. We'll
Gotcha.
keep our eyes out, definitely.
all right. Yeah, I don't like Rome. I don't like
Right.
Breath of the Wild was my first Zelda game. I had never played one before. I had no idea what to expect. And when I finally stumbled on that memory on her walkway, I had to stop because I was very mad for quite
Right.
a while. I had a lot of feelings about that scene.
Honestly, as many people as I talk to in the fandom now, if they genuinely like Rome, that kind of makes me not trust them.
Yeah, I
Like,
side-eye those people
as funny as
too.
it sounds, like I can't.
I'm like, hey, they did not redeem him in Age of Calamity. Like, they both
No.
need a lot of therapy. Like,
Oh
no, he's not
gosh.
off the hook
That
yet.
Age of Calamity. Oh my god. Don't. No.
All right, we won't go there. That's fine.
we have strong feelings about what they did in that game.
Oh, I can understand why.
But yeah. Another thing is that the scene where Naboris woke up
Yeah.
and was sort of going towards Karakara Bazaar.
Mm-hmm.
How long do you think Urbosa was sort of retraining Naboris to walk in a circle versus going straight towards the
Straight
Gerudo?
towards the bazaar.
Yeah.
A long time. Time doesn't matter for her. I'd say probably at least a couple of weeks. I mean, my feeling in the game is that when Link wakes up on the plateau, that's when all the beasts fire up too.
Right.
I think those things happen at the same time. So
I feel like that's kind of supported by canon if you talk to a few of the Gerudo guards.
Okay. Yeah, I think that might be where I got that from. But I think probably for a while she had to, really think about and work to get it to kind of stay in its lap. And then over time it got easier for her to maintain that, and she could do other things.
Yeah, I really liked that detail. I thought it was smart because I think when I first played Breath of the Wild, my writer brain would fire and I'd be like, well, if it wants to attack the thing, then why doesn't it just attack the thing? Like it's But I really like that detail that Urbosa thinks in that scene that, oh no, it's heading towards the bazaar. It's going to hurt people. I have to consciously reroute it. And it seems like very in character for Urbosa to be consistently making an exhausting sacrifice. Yeah, I really like that detail.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, she is the chief of the Gerudo.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, she still is.
It's like it's even in death. She's like,
yes.
Yeah.
The captain goes down with the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah. We kind of touched on this a little bit. There are parts of the fic where Urbosa holds resentment towards Rome because of the way he pressured Zelda. Do you think Urbosa blames him most for the way Hyrule fell, or does she blame the age-long threat of Ganon more?
Ooh, I think it's probably a combination of things. Because that's a lot of moving parts, and I think it's really easy. It's really easy once you're past a situation to look back and say, this is exactly what I should have done, and I have all the
Yeah.
puzzle pieces now, and it all makes sense. But the problem is, when you're in the middle of that situation and going forward, you have to work with the information that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I do not personally care for Rome, I do think that he was trying to do the best that he could do, which doesn't mean he was doing it well,
Yeah.
Um,
Or that he wasn't being a jerk.
Right. He was trying to do the best that he could do with what he thought was going to work, and he thought that trying to harass Zelda into if he harassed her just enough, she would buckle down and do it, when that's not what was going to work for her. But nobody knew that until she finally took the act that going to sacrifice herself, and that's what kind of popped things apart.
Mm-hmm.
But by that time, it was already way too late.
Yeah. Good answer. I called you to press out earlier. I'm sorry. You're Obsidian. That's because what your Discord name says. But Obsidian, do you have a comment or other question?
So when Link comes back into the story, Urbosa doesn't recognize him at first. And then when she does recognize him, she almost immediately recognizes that he's not the same person. What do you think changed that she could perceive that so easily?
So that whole scene where Link is kind of teasing the beast, that is exactly how I played the game for a while, because I was very fascinated with Vana Boris, and I thought it was really cool, so I would go try to watch it, and then it tried to kill me one day. And I was like, oh, all right. Like, don't do that.
Do not.
So yeah, don't do that. So I would show up in a variety of things to try and not get fried by the camel. So that was kind of like a little throw to how I was playing. And I think I think she recognizes the tunic more than she recognizes him. Because she's well acquainted with that blue tunic, and that's when he shows up wearing that, that's when she says, "Oh, but how is that possible? He fell down and died in the mud that day with like the rest of us. So how is he back?" So, I don't know what I want to say here. I think she probably gets to a point where she kind of has to accept, there's a lot of other odd things going on. She's still, kind of herself, but as a spirit and trapped in this machine that is now marching itself around the desert, and there's not really great explanations as to why all this is happening. So why not, the teenager she knew 100 years ago showing up again, that kind of makes sense all in that context.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes good enough sense.
I always love the explanation in fantasy things where it's like, it makes sense because it doesn't make sense. Like, it's just
makes sense. Well, I mean, no one knows how to explain everything 100%.
Yeah.
So my job, like, I often have to solve problems and they don't necessarily make 100% sense as I get to the solution. So there is sometimes you just have to say, okay, this is working. I don't necessarily need to understand why that is.
Yeah.
Don't fix what isn't broken.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. My third question down here, I'm just going down the list. I love the distinction that the castle is her beast as opposed to like Calamity Ganon being her beast.
Okay.
I think you alluded to that a little bit. But so I'm asking, between her 17 years being under such pressure and the 100 years containing the calamity, which one do you think was worse for Zelda?
Wow. Having been a 17-year-old girl who was under a lot of pressure at one point in my life, the other kinds of pressures from adulthood are better because I felt like I had more choices, and I think maybe when she's containing the calamity, there is no one on her back telling her what she has to do.
Right.
She can choose to deal with that whatever makes sense for her in that moment. And I haven't thought very deeply as to what, how active that 100 years transpired.
Mhm.
Perhaps someday I will. Or if there were times where, there wasn't a lot going on and then things would be very intense. But I think she probably had more autonomy, standing for her kingdom before, in that 100 years than she had as a teenager, basically being stuffed into a hole she didn't quite fit into, and she couldn't figure out how to fit into it as much as she might have
Right.
wanted to.
Yeah.
Oop.
Oh, sorry. You go first.
That reminded me of another thing that I thought about while I was reading the fic. Urbosa would curse at the malice
Mhm.
inside Naboris. And something you wrote kind of like triggered my brain a little bit. You were talking about how Urbosa didn't know if the malice was being controlled by Ganon or if it was there. Like just there. So do you think that Ganon watches everything that goes on in the beasts through the malice, or is
Oh,
it just there?
100%. No, he has an idea of what's going on. Like, I think that's how you get the blights at the end when you finally go and unlock the thing, and it's like, oh, okay, this is the last chance you have to block this guy from taking the beast back.
Mhm.
It's time to go murder. I mean, if you blow off the beast, you still encounter those blights.
Right. Do you
Oh,
think Zelda could hear her cursing since she was inside Ganon? I thought about that while I was reading it too, and I had to stop and laugh for a minute.
yeah, I definitely. As far as my question goes, I was like, I wrote it down. I'm like, I don't even know what I would answer to this because, like, what 17 years when you think about 100 years, like, there's such a difference in
Yeah.
the time you have to get through. But then at the same time, the pressure she was under and being that age and taking things the way she took them and having a father who wasn't as supportive as he should have been and only really finding a friend in Link in the last few weeks, I think that it really probably was worse because in the 100 years that she was containing Ganon, probably wasn't ideal, but it was her power that she was understanding, and there's a sense of relief that Link's gonna come back. I've got my power now. I can do this, even though I'm sure it wasn't easy. There was more of this is her time, and maybe this was supposed to happen instead of having 17 years where she's just like, I might do Hyrule. This is I'm not
I
enough.
think there's also probably relief for her in the fact that she understands she's not broken.
Right.
I mean, I think Zelda has a lot of imposter syndrome.
Right.
And have that moment where all of a sudden it's like, oh no, I really can do this. I mean, that's really empowering.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the things that I did like about AOC was that moment where Zelda got her powers.
Yeah.
Like you could see the switch flick in her brain, and that was probably like one of the peak things about that game.
Yeah. There were some good things about Age of Calamity, but
I had a lot of fun playing Age of Calamity, but I got to a point where I was like, I'm just not going to get upset about the story, and I'm just going to enjoy this.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah. Obsidian, do you have any more questions?
I don't think I do have any more questions.
Okay, then I'll move
I mean,
over to one of the
yeah.
Tumblr questions. So each podcast, we're going to answer one Tumblr submitted question. Usually these are general questions about writing or fanfic writing, but one Snidget Widgeon just went ahead and knowing DrSteggy said wanted to do something specific. Okay, so to DrSteggy, this story definitely has a different feel to your other work. Is it because you are able to identify more with Urbosa?
That is probably true. So again, Breath of the Wild was my first Zelda. I had no idea what I was doing, and as I was kind of flailing along in the game, trying to do what the game was telling me to do, the first memory I got is the one that at the end of the Linear Promenade, and which is when Calamity Ganon comes back, and it's kind of like it was the first place I think that you really see all four champions, their faces, and as I was going through that cutscene, I saw her and I was like, I need to know who she is, and the reason why, because this is not obvious because you're just listening to this, but I am a lot older than a lot of the fans that I now find myself swimming with. I'm in my 50s. And I looked at Urbosa and I was like, she's got to be close in age to me. And she looks like she is completely over whatever is going on. And so I kind of really, and I didn't know what the history of the Gerudo were through the entirety of these games until several months later. So, so when so I think like after that, like heading out to the desert and trying to find out who she was one of the things I tried to do, and probably tried that a little earlier in the game than I ought to have. But
Yeah.
I mean, Naboris was the last beast I got back, but I had definitely slummed around Gerudo Town for quite a while. But it was nice to see her because it's already a video game where I'm piloting a 17-year-old boy, and I'm like, all right, whatever. They're all 17-year-old boys. And he's blonde and whatever. He's blonde and hot, which I'm not. So whatever. So having a character that's kind of like, a fairly major player in the backstory of the game that I could, is a lot like me is very cool. So I feel like I relate to her a whole lot. And I enjoy writing her because I feel like I can just, kind of think about how I might react to something and channel it through her.
Yeah. I definitely think that's great, and obviously I believe that no one is too old to enjoy fandom franchises, to write fan fiction. If it makes you happy, you can do what you want to do with your time, and that's great. As long as it doesn't hurt other people.
I honestly get excited when I hear about older people in fandom because I'm just like, okay, that like, as someone who is only 23, it makes me think about, okay, like I can still do this even when I'm older.
Oh
like
yeah,
there's a
100%.
lot of pressure for younger people to give up their quote unquote childish things as they get older and get careers and grow up. But like that's kind of something that I feel like a lot of middle-aged to older adults don't really have, and that attributes to a lot of things in our society today because they don't know how to have fun.
Yeah. Or it's harder for them to relate to. It's harder for them to relate to people that are younger than them because it's easy to write them off as being immature. I mean, the 100,000 words I spent most of my time writing last year, when I started reading the Zelda fanfic, because I hit that stage of my hysteria over Zelda. I mean, going from like, yeah, I've heard of this franchise and I know I'm not playing anybody named Zelda, to where I am now, like that happened over about 6 months. It was a very intense time. But I, went off looking for fanfic where those characters were aged up, because I'm like, really, the canon's so flexible and you could do this anytime, and there's a lot of possibilities here. And I wasn't, if it's out there, I didn't find it.
Right.
So I ended up, 88,000 of those words I wrote last year were a long fic about a 40-year-old Lincoln Zelda. Because it's easier for me to relate to.
Yeah, I appreciate when you. I think a couple of times you requested for me to do, middle-aged or older Lincoln. I think there is a barrier for me doing that because since I'm younger, I approach that idea with like, I'm gonna mess this up because I don't know how 40-year-olds act. So I think there's a barrier between doing something that you don't know how to represent, and that's probably why there's a little bit of a a lack of that. But I I think just your presence in the fandom and in this community has definitely put some value to that. And as far as representation in the fandom as a whole, I think that the franchise, if you play other Zelda games, does have key players who are older, who have different body types, and I think they've been doing that for a long time, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, can I just interject and say that like you really do like some amazing
Yes.
like
Yes.
you're 3D printing ancient arrows and the Great Eagle Bow and cosplaying, and I'm just like,
Yes.
I am
God.
God, like goals, serious goals. Like I'm hands down, like that's the kind of like old person that I want to be. Like,
Yeah,
Yes.
I didn't start that until I was much older too. Actually, I was at a con this weekend and I won a prize for best props with that bow. I was so happy.
Yes, you did.
Nice.
I believe it. I'm so proud.
So excited.
It literally,
Ah.
like, it's amazing.
Okay. This kind of has to do with it. It's Snidget Widgeon's like second little question.
Oh no, she
Yeah.
did a two-parter.
Along those lines, and for the
For
co-host
you.
as well, which characters do you identify with the most, or how do you get into the head of the POV you are endeavoring to write? I guess we'll start with DrSteggy.
Okay, so it's hard for me to answer these kinds of writing questions because I don't think about it a whole lot. Like my education's all like really kind of a lot more science oriented. I mean, I had to take English because I had to take English, but I didn't take a lot of English. Like, so I mean, I don't know. I just kind of think. I mean, I identify a lot with the Link from Breath of the Wild because that's another character I feel probably has a lot of imposter syndrome, and I can relate to that very hard. And also just I probably have 1,000 hours in that game, so I've just like been kind of looking through his lens for quite a while. Like it's easier for me to kind of think about Urbosa because I feel she's very similar to me. Like I have harder times with the Zora and with the Gorons as I like them, but I don't. They feel alien enough to me that I think I'd have to really work to kind of put a story in through one of their points of view.
Mm.
I feel a little better about the Rito, but I also sometimes work with birds, and I the bird personality. I think I understand. I like to think I understand. I don't think I always understand it. So it's kind of fun to write them like an Amazon parrot or something like that.
Right.
But I guess I just don't think about it that much, and I just kind of just plunge forward and come back to it later if it doesn't work.
Yeah. What about you, Obsidian?
So, because I've been writing for over 10 years, like I've kind of developed the skills that I need to sort of put myself in someone else's shoes, which part of that is also just because I'm an empath, so it's really easy for me to feel like what other people would feel like in proverbial situations. But honestly, a lot of the times when I go to write a new character, I usually can't, and I end up having to practice and just think for hours about like what would they do in this situation? What about this? What about that? What if this happened? And it really is just like this constant train of going on in my head, like at all times, like whenever I'm not busy. But I think personally, the character that I relate to the most is Zelda and Link, just because I mean I'm sort of close to them in age, and like I've gone through a lot of pressure and stress, even though I'm younger. But and then it's kind of difficult to explain, but those two in particular, like I just have a really easy time writing because they're young. They can goof off, they can have fun, they can be serious. And especially the way that I write is because I take things out of verse and put it into a modern AU most of the time, which just cranks everything up to 100 because that if they're not going to be goofy, like what's the point? Like make people laugh,
Right.
make people, feel emotions and
Hmm.
maybe hurt some along the way, but like that's just what you do. And you know, like
Yeah.
if I'm not crying, then they're not crying either. So
Yeah.
that's the
That's
main goal.
fair.
Is I also have to look through it as myself as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say that I think I've talked about this on Tumblr and people ask, but I identify with Breath of the Wild Link the most. Um because of selective mutism. Like now I'm talking openly, but when I was younger, like I had trouble with uh really opening up and making friends because I had anxiety and I was bullied as a kid. So like when they talked about him having all these eyes on him and closing off to everyone else because of the pressure he was under and being selectively mute because of that, I really appreciated that kind of representation because I feel like that sometimes too, and I had trouble speaking. Um, let's see. How do I get in the head of the POV? I am kind of trying to work on this because I feel like it might be my insecurity about it, but I might be projecting myself onto I feel like everyone I write is like a different facet of my personality. And so I'm trying not to do that.
That's
See, I
fair,
feel that's what
actually.
fanfic is
Yeah.
about.
It's fair.
I project onto
I know.
everybody.
I've really been trying recently to make them as accurate to their characters as opposed to me just like writing the dialogue of what I would do in their shoes. Like I've really been working on that. So as far as getting into the head of the POV, it's just like really thinking about the characters' past and how they react to things, how whether they like this person or not, like what's going on, it's about thinking about everything and really not thinking about what's the best, like most fancy string of words, but thinking about what would this character actually say. Um, and I feel like I get that right like 50% of the time because it's such a hard thing to get out of my own head. Um, but yeah, I am working on that, and
I
it's
think the
something
amount of
that
people who like your
yeah
writing would disagree with you. Um,
that I'm I've been meaner to myself. I'll say that. I think that was pretty good.
Another thing I remembered while you were talking is sometimes what I do to practice like getting into a character's head is I will roleplay.
Hmm.
But that's that takes some cooperation between different people. So it's not something that I can like rely on, but one shots, roleplay, spending hours of my life thinking about different characters and what they would do in ridiculous situations. That's pretty much.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
But yeah.
Okay, well, we are reaching the end. Are there any other comments or ending statements you two would like to make?
I don't think so. I very much enjoy being part of this community.
Okay.
It took me a little while to find everybody when I was out flailing last year, but I feel like I've got a good group of people. It's
Yeah.
nice. It's nice.
I mean, for you only being around for a year and doing everything you're doing,
Yeah.
that's still like freaking fantastic. This like I've only been around for what 5-6 months maybe since December. Like I'm just sitting here writing, doing what I do. And then you're out here doing all this mess, which
Well,
affectionate.
I
A
probably
mess is affectionate.
I probably screamed on Tumblr into the void for a year.
Oh.
Like before I started kind of connecting with people. And then like all of a sudden like I got a follower one day and I was like, what is this? who are you? You know, like, what are you doing?
Hello?
Yeah. Well, oh, what? Because I was posting a lot of like screenshots from the game. Like, it's just that's just what my Tumblr became for a while, and I started meeting people that way.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was probably screaming about Zelda for a year before somebody took pity on me and said, "Come over here."
Not pity, you're cool.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've reached the end of the podcast. I will post a link to DrSteggy's AO3 and her Tumblr and anything else that you can find her on. She's a fantastic author. Her
And a
cosplay
fantastic
pictures
reader.
on Tumblr, like, you will marvel. Like I do. And yeah, thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a good evening.
Yeah.
Mhm.